The first thing I saw when I pulled up to the house was a notice zip-tied to my own gate. It said I needed permission to use my dock. Let that sit with you, a second permission to walk onto the wood my uncle put in the water. I laughed at first, because what else do you do when a stranger tells you you can't stand where you were born to stand? Then I realized I couldn't laugh and not do anything about it. I'd been gone 12 years. The road down the hill had grown narrow pine needles thick in the ruts where my truck's tires used to bite. The house looked like the same sad postcard I remembered, cedar-gone silver porch, sagging on one corner, the stone chimney leaning like it had a story to tell. Inside smelled like pine and old smoke and dust that had made a home. My uncle's recliner was still where he left it, the wood stove full of yesterday's ash. I set the windows ajar and let the lake come in. The dock, the one with my uncle's initials carved on a piling, was still there, a little tilted at the end. Piling's gray hardware crusted with salt and time. That's where I paused. For a long time I thought the lake was a thing you just remembered, and it stayed the same. It wasn't. New docks had sprung up like mushrooms, all shiny composite decking and solar lights and motion sensors. One even had a sign, Lot 12 HOA use only. Someone had put a rope ladder on someone else's pier. Someone had measured things and decided what belonged to who without asking the people who'd actually owned the land for decades. Then she showed up. Karen clipboard practice smile, the kind of patience that reads like preparation. 3 others with her shirts ironed in the same exact shade of authority. She stood at the top of the slope and told me in that calm, certain way people use when they mean to end a conversation that my gate violated shoreline policy and that access to the water was a community right. She had a folder, she had check boxes, she had a seal at the bottom and a fine schedule. 7 days to comply, then $50 a day, doubling every week. Friendly escalation, she called it. I didn't sign anything that day. I didn't slam things either. I just watched them walk away. The clipboard thumbed like a talisman. Later, when I read the laminated notice, the language was clean and final community enforcement shared use majority vote. It assumed I had accepted all of that. I hadn't. No one had asked me to join a covenant when I inherited the place. But someone had put paper on a gate and expected me to step aside. So I went to the one place paper can't argue with paper, the county records. My uncle wasn't the neatest, but he kept things. It took prying open a warped cabinet and a pocket knife under the sink to find a sealed envelope tied up with brittle red string, Dock Survey 1989, written in his hand. Inside was a typed letter from a surveyor named Langley. It said plainly that parcel 487L included sole ownership of the shoreline and exclusive access to 4 docks recorded with the county, not contingent on any subdivision charter, not subject to shared use. That kind of sentence makes your heart do something small and serious. The letter was a start, not a finish. There was no map, no stamped plat in the envelope. Maybe it had been filed separately, maybe borrowed and lost, but it was a thread. I took that thread down to the county recorder, the kind of place that smells like fluorescent light and paper and other people's small certainties. They pulled a brittle-bound ledger down for me, gloves and all, and I found it parcel 487L, inked in a hand that didn't forget. 4 narrow rectangles reached into the water dock, a Dock B, Dock C, Dock D, and a notation that read, Private Riparian Access Non-Common. In the back was a smaller page. Access is non-derivative. No reassignment without notarized release by deed holder. Filed, stamped, older than the HOA's newsletter. That day the ledger felt less like old paper and more like a promise someone else had made and kept for me. I left with certified copies tucked under my arm and a quiet certainty if you want to win against an assumption, you have to make the facts louder than the assumption. They tried a different kind of pressure next. An envelope from the HOA arrived on my porch, a formal violation with glossy photos of my locked gate, time-stamped Karen's name printed at the bottom. Then someone bolted a powder-coated post directly into the exposed bedrock at the base of my slope, a sign reading HOA Shoreline Authorized Use Only. No knock, no warning, concrete set to last. I documented it, photographed drill holes, noted bolt depth. I removed the post slowly, carefully, not to vandalize, but to record a thing someone had no right to install. When I returned the post, a citation followed willful destruction of community infrastructure. The photos cropped my hand on the metal. Context omitted, implication included. That was when it stopped being paperwork and started feeling personal. Tires slashed one night. A hooded figure on the pier at 1:14 a.m. presence without confrontation. Someone was trying to make the cost of staying higher than the cost of leaving. I called Daniel, an old lawyer who smelled of paper and glue and the quiet of towns that don't change fast. He told me what I already suspected: they don't seize first. They pressure, normalize profit. If you open the gate once, they treat that as consent. The trick, he said, is to build a record they can't shrug off. Things got loud in ways I hadn't expected. I found neighbors who'd been nudged into community access because they wanted a quiet summer and didn't read the fine print. I found Walter, quiet retired, who'd watched his dock turn into slip 3 and decided one year it wasn't worth the fight. He'd given up. That's the problem with this kind of slow takeover: fatigue is the weapon. Then the twist I didn't see coming. A stranger at the property line, a former board treasurer who left a thumb drive on my railing and melted back into the trees. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't have to. The drive contained internal minutes spreadsheets with line items titled dock access, rental deposit ledgers, and worst clearest audio clips of board meetings where Karen and her crew discussed calmly renting slips and escalating if a property owner challenged them. One clip: he won't dig, he's just a seasonal. If he does, we'll make it expensive. That was the moment the story stopped being an argument about gray areas and became evidence of a scheme. I took everything to Daniel. He read, then wrote with the precise, cold economy of someone who files complaints for a living. Our letter to the HOA was measured and certified: cease unauthorized use and rental of my docks. Retract all citations. Suspend enforcement until county review. We sent copies to the county, to a water rights consultant, to anyone who would keep a record that couldn't be erased by a newsletter. The HOA sent back an open letter calling me a disruptor and asking for calm. It was quaint. The community meeting at the pavilion, the one Karen had scheduled like she already had the room, was where the story turned. I walked in with a binder and copies of plats and the Langley letter. I passed them out quietly, let the ink do the talking. I played the short audio clip and watched faces change: confusion, embarrassment, anger. Folks who had never read the bylaws suddenly wanted to see maps. Someone I'd never met stood and moved to suspend enforcement until an independent review. The motion passed. It wasn't triumph exactly, but it was recognition. That night I slept like a man who had finally been invited to the table. Once the county surveyors came, the rest was process catching up to truth. Measurements matched the 1986 consolidation. Pilings were stamped with brass discs my uncle had set decades ago. The county filed a preliminary case and a review was opened. The HOA's rental pages were screen captured and archived. One by one, the quiet things Karen had done, the rentals, the slips assigned as community assets, were shown to be revenues drawn from private structures. It was ugly small-town theft dressed in sunscreen and polite minutes. In the end, the resolution was anticlimactic in its civility. A certified letter arrived acknowledging Parcel 487L's ownership of the docks. The HOA vacated claims to those structures. Karen resigned without fanfare. No apology came. The quiet thing about power is some people will leave without ever saying they were wrong, but the certified paper carried a weight an apology never could. I placed that page beside my uncle's old survey letter and felt a kind of settling. The work after that wasn't legal theater, it was labor. I replaced boards, drove screws, matched cedar grain to old patterns until the dock didn't look like a place others had tied up boats to rent, but like the place my uncle built to come home. People began to nod when we passed on paths. A neighbor left a coil of rope on the railing. Someone slipped a note under my rock that said, "Glad you stood up." No signatures. You don't need signatures when enough people remember what's right. Here's what I keep thinking about, and I want you to sit with this too. Institutions only have the power. We let them assume. Paper can be a trap, but paper can also be a shield. They relied on people not looking, not asking, not reading plats filed in a county building most folks never visit. They hoped fatigue would win. It almost did. So what's the lesson? Don't assume that community always means collective good. Sometimes it's a cloak. Sometimes it's a ledger. Hold on to the records you inherit. Ask where the lines are drawn. Show up. Not with a yell, not with a vendetta, but with copies, maps, plats, deeds, and the patience to move them across a table until someone else has to read them out loud. Justice in small towns is less about dramatic courtroom scenes and more about the steady persistence of one person doing the boring work of proof. The final scene is ordinary and satisfying me at the end of the dock on a late afternoon boots on new cedar, the water making the same small, honest sounds it always did. No new signs, no strangers tying up boats. The line on the ground that I drove a little white stake into weeks ago still stands where the survey says it should. I don't need to wave a flag or hang a chain. The boards speak for themselves now, straight, clean kept. Ownership is quieter than rage. It's the steady repairing of what was almost lost. So tell me, where would you draw the line if someone started redrawing your life by committee? Have you ever fought to keep something that belonged to you, or watched someone else quietly take what wasn't theirs? Share your story. Tell me if I was right to stay, or if I should have walked away. Either way, you probably know someone who should know to check their own county records. Share this with them. With